Chloe Demirovsky helps organizations prepare for and recover from disasters. Chloe, we have been talking a lot about the extreme heat that is being felt worldwide. It's not going away. And we've all seen those movies where the world is overheated, next come the riots, the violence. Is that what we are already seeing? For instance, this was the most violent weekend on record, wars in Sudan, famine. I was just in Baltimore the other day, and the first thing I noticed was how hot it was. Should governments be preparing for this and other extreme weather events?
What you're getting at is the fact that you end up having cascading crises. It's one thing that can tip off another that can tip off another. So you have extreme heat, which can lead to social unrest, which can lead to more violence, especially if you're in cities, which are urban heat islands anyway, so they're hotter than the surrounding areas. You have a lot of people together, it's hot, that can cause all kinds of problems and anxieties. And so policymakers, city leaders have to figure out how to deal with that, as well as trying to educate people about how to keep themselves cool, like you just did in that segment, but also how to maybe think about the way that we organize our urban communities so that they don't get quite so darn hot.
And Chloe, to that effect, as I pointed out in a story that we did the other day from Brooklyn Homes, which was the neighborhood in Baltimore where the shootings took place, the first thing I noticed is there were no trees. And it was typical of the 1960s public housing complexes where the trees were bulldozed over and then they built these literally concrete bunkers where people lived and sweltered in the summer. Can you explain further what a heat island is and what kind of action you think leaders need to take to protect people from excessive heat?
That's exactly right. I mentioned that they're urban heat islands, but that implies that it's the whole city. And to some extent it is. But then when you look at the cities itself a level deeper, you'll see that it is really not equally distributed across cities. So some of those leafy, brownstone kind of wealthier neighborhoods with parks and urban green spaces are not nearly as hot as some of the more disadvantaged, more marginalized communities, especially in areas where there is a lot of public housing. And of course, where these neighborhoods are typically, historically, more occupied by minority populations as well. So it's a really clear and stark disadvantage among certain communities. These areas get hotter because there is less greenery, there's less vegetation, there's more asphalt, there's more concrete, there's more pavement that just sucks in all of that heat and keeps it there. And so if there's less investment in making these areas a little bit cooler and a little bit less subject to that urban heat island environment, then that becomes a really unequal problem across the United States. There are some things that city planners can do in the short term, like creating cooling centers in libraries or in public centers and community centers, places for people to go. If they don't have air conditioning or if their air conditioner breaks, we're needing a lot more air conditioning up here in the Northeast where I am. I'm in New York City than we used to, certainly, but other places in the country as well that are used to relying on a lot of air conditioning also need these cooling centers for people who either don't have them or if their air conditioning breaks, or of course, if power grids go out, we don't invest properly in power grids and other type of large scale infrastructure that is really outside of any individual's control. So extreme heat is a killer,
Mashanya, who is
silent killer for a long time. No, please.
No, I was going to say our Vanessa Mashanya, who lives in Seattle, says that, they don't need air conditioning up there, but this year was different. The World Meteorological Organization warning this week that El Nino is here and that we must prepare. What does that mean?
Yeah, so we've been in a La Nina cycle, which means that the surface temperature of the Pacific Ocean was cooling, but now we're entering El Nino. So that means that the sea surface temperature in the equatorial Pacific is warming. That is also corresponding. So the last time that happened was in 2016, which was the hottest year on record. And now we've, of course, had more warming since then. So we've been in a cooling phase. We've been seeing a lot of extreme heat events anyway. And so now that we're having El Nino meet this human-induced climate change that we're seeing, we could potentially have certainly the hottest year on record. And there is a 66% chance, according to the WMO, that we could temporarily exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target set by the Paris Climate Accord. So already the Earth is at about 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So it's not that much of a jump to get to that 1.5 level. Now, in the Paris Climate Accord, they're saying that they don't want sustained temperatures over 1.5 2, but hopefully 1.5. In the long term, this could be just a temporary exceeding of that level, but still it should serve as a stark warning to people about what is to come, that heat is here to stay, that people need to prepare, communities need to prepare, businesses need to prepare, all organizations need to be thinking about heat and adapting. We don't like to talk about adapting that much, but as you can see, it is essential.
Chloe, I'm a sci-fi fan. One of my favorite movies of all time, Soylent Green. The heat and dry conditions fueled many of those fires happening in the United States and Canada. The reason I bring up Soylent Green is because of what the skies look like when that smoke wafted over to where you are. I want you to listen to what one scientist had to say about humans being the reason the fires started in the first place.
We provide the vast majority of ignitions that start wildfires across the country. In fact, more than 84% of ignitions come from us and our activities. And they could be anything from trash burning to driving a car with a hot tailpipe off the side of the road, to cigarettes, to campfires, to fireworks.
Chloe, the Google machines were in overdrive as people were trying to figure out, was by the time we got to 2025, the global temperatures were going to warm, and we were going to see what we saw this summer in New York City where you are.
Yeah, it's pretty scary when you see these sorts of smoke events. It's something we think about happening out west, not here. And we certainly think of Canada as being a cold place. And then when you hear that most of it is on fire, Canada has been under a heat dome for a while. And so while it is true that a lot of wildfires are ignited by humans, it's most likely that the Canadian fires have been mostly ignited by lightning. As we know, Canada is largely forest. So when that starts to burn, it's going to be an uncontrolled fire because there's nothing to break the fire. There's just more and more forest, and it's super dry. And so it created this huge forest fire, and then all of that smoke came wafting down. And even though it was kind of predictable that we could see the path of the smoke and we can see where it's coming, we don't really know what that means. If you haven't lived through it, if you haven't experienced skies that are that eerie shade of orange that you're talking about, it's not something that you can necessarily comprehend. It's outside of your experience. So when it happens to you, it is really scary. New York was really scary during that time, and the surrounding areas as well. And we're not as adapted to it. It's something that if you're in the Northeast, where most of the population of the country lives, you haven't learned about wildfires. Even if you're a prepper, you think about hurricanes, maybe you think about tornadoes, you think about, extreme rainfall, but wildfires, that's not really the risk that we've been planning for. And now suddenly we have to.
Chloe, before you go, I've only got 20 seconds left, but give me your best argument for those people that say, it's just you liberals being, hyperventilating about the fact that it's just hot outside.
Yeah, so, you can look at the temperatures, you can look at the history of it, that the climate has warmed significantly over time, but you can also just go outside and feel what you're feeling. It's really hot across a lot of different places. So the odds of something going terribly wrong if you're wrong are not that high, but the odds of something going terribly wrong if we're right, it could be really bad. So it's really important to prepare for it and plan for the effects. And you can do it in ways that aren't extreme about changing your lifestyle, but are actually about making the world better, making our air cleaner and less polluted, and making a better, more livable world for everybody.
Chloe Dymbrowski, I want to thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.